Hello, everyone. I thought I would compare some adaptations of A Christmas Carol, the Charles Dickens novella written in 1843. Now, there have been many adaptations of A Christmas Carol. In fact, there have probably been more straightforward adaptations of A Christmas Carol than almost any book that I can think of. Um, some people have said that there have been more adaptations of Dracula and Frankenstein, but not really. I mean, there have been more appearances with the characters of. There have been more appearances of the characters Dracula and Frankenstein than of A Christmas Carol. When we were talking about straight adaptations of the book, I'm hard pressed to find a book that's been adapted more. And I think the reason might be is that because A Christmas Carol is a novella, it fits well into a cinematic framework, unlike most other novels where you have to trim things down. A Christmas Carol is almost the exact is the perfect length for film adaptation, which is why I think it has been adapted so much. Um, Combined with the fact that it is almost mythological Christmas story at this point. And I thought I would talk about some of the adaptations that I like the most. I was going to talk about one, but there are really two that I like the most. The first is the 1938 Reginald Owen version of A Christmas Carol, the MGM version. Now, my family and I have actually watched this version of A Christmas Carol on Christmas Eve every year for as long as I've been alive, and even before I was alive. I think they were watching this in the '80s on VHS, and so I'm a bit biased towards this version because we've watched it so many years in a row, um, and I'm actually not the biggest fan of the Alistair Sim version, which I've only seen, though I may need to watch it again. I've only seen it, I think, about maybe twice. Mainly because I'm just, and this is an unpopular opinion, I'm in a minority on this, seemingly, is that I just don't feel that Alistair Sim's Scrooge is very intimidating. I just don't feel that with him. He doesn't give off a sense of menace, really. Um, this version of A Christmas Carol was originally um, Lionel Barrymore was originally supposed to play Scrooge, who of course played Mr. Potter in A Christmas Carol. I mean, in It's a Wonderful Life, and of course Mr. Potter would have been. I mean, not Mr. Potter. Lionel Barrymore would have been a fantastic Scrooge, but unfortunately he had a stroke, which is what put him in a wheelchair, and so he couldn't do it. So they got Reginald Owen, who I think does an admirable job as Scrooge. When I think of Scrooge in my head, I first think of Reginald Owen. Now, the only downside to this version is that it does, because it was an MGM production, which was known for being rather glossy, they did cut out some of the more darker elements, like the character of Belle is not in this version. The whole relationship with his fiance was cut out, although it does leave some dark scenes, like for example when Scrooge is standing over his corpse, although he doesn't know it, which is covered with a sheet. That's in it, and but I think the reason why I like this is that it really captures the nostalgic, gleeful side of Dickens, um, the cozy side of Dickens, so to speak, where you really feel Christmas come to life in the characters. And I especially like the actor that played Fred. I thought he's probably the best Fred that I've ever seen. That the speech where he gives about Christmas doing him good, to me that's the probably the best rendition of the speech that I've seen. And so I think, and because this was made in the 1930s, which was less than 100 years after the story was written, it has a very it has almost a documentary kind of vibe to it. Which it's kind of contradictory, because at the same time it feels like a glossy MGM film, but because it was made in the 30s, it also has somewhat of of um of, I guess you could say, a Victorian vibe to it because of the period in which it was made. So it captures the spirit of Dickens in a very profound way, given the fact that it was made closer to the time period in which the story was written. And now I will go to the version which I will say that Reginald Owen is probably my favorite Scrooge in terms of like who I imagine in my head, but in terms of the best film version, I would have to say it's the George C. Scott Christmas Carol from 1984. It really captures the atmosphere of the book. Well, like it captures the like this one captures like the whimsical side of Dickens. This one captures more of the dreary side of A Christmas Carol, where when I am it captures again the atmosphere and the ambiance of the book. That the images that that I get in my head when I read the book, they come to life in this adaptation. And I think George C. Scott gives a lot of nuance to the performance of Scrooge. That he is more subtle than some of the other versions. He's less of a caricature. He's more subdued, and he acts more realistically. The only problem, if there is one, is that he uses an American accent because he was an American actor. He doesn't attempt to use a British accent, which is probably for the best because I think it would have been odd if he had attempted one. But but at the same time, there's a lot of nuance to his performance, and it's more believable when you see him change because he changes in a more subtle way when compared to some of the other adaptations. And yes, I'm also predisposed to like this one because it has Susanna York in it, the actress Susanna York, who I have a bit of a crush on. I'm a bit infatuated with her, and she gives though even though she has a limited screen time, she gives a very emotional but yet subdued performance because in some versions Mrs. Cratchit can be somewhat too happy, whimsical, whereas in this version you can see that the suffering in Mrs. Cratchit's eyes when Tim passes away in the future, and also you can see the pain in her eyes and the frustration when she critiques Scrooge's greed, and that there's a lot of subtlety and nuance. There's a lot of subtleties and nuances to her performance, which is why even though she has a limited amount of screen time, I think she really captures the essence of Mrs. Cratchit in a way that many other actresses in other adaptations did not, because you can tell that you can see that Mrs. Cratchit is suffering along with her husband, along with her family, but she wants to be strong for her family, so she keeps the pain subdued. So again, it's a very nuanced and subdued performance, and also I think that, for example, Marley's ghost is given a great amount of attention, where he's corporeal in this instead of being a specter that you can see through, which I actually think makes him seem more menacing, because because what a lot of people don't realize, that when people see ghosts, they usually don't see them looking like a specter, so to speak, that you can see through. They usually just look like physical corporeal people. And I thought that this version captured that very well. And it even has something in the book that isn't often portrayed in the book. When it even has something from the book that often is not portrayed in film. When you have when Marley has the bandage wrapped around his head to keep his mouth from opening. But well, in this version though, he takes the bandage off and his mouth drops like that, like a corpse would. And that is not in most adaptations, but it is in this one. So I would say that that in terms of what captures the Gothic aspects of A Christmas Carol the best, I would say this version is definitely the one to watch. I would say overall this is the best adaptation of the book. But Reginald Owen, I think, is the most iconic Scrooge. Performance-wise, it's hard to say. You could argue Scott's is better, but I think that in terms of look and mannerisms, Reginald Owen is the most iconic Scrooge in my mind. So I think these overall are the two best adaptations of A Christmas Carol. If you want to watch the whimsical aspects of Dickens, watch this version. If you want to see some of the more darker aspects, watch the Scott version.